continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph from Meseches Sukkah. This is Sukkah Daf 37a. The Rabbanan here are responding to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda on the previous Summit said that the Sukkah has to be built from the four minim of the lulav. And now the Chachamim are saying back to Rabbi Yehuda, that's going to lead to the following leniency. Lo matzar bas minim, let's say a person can't find one of these four species, yoshiv uvatal, then the person's going to be sitting there, not even going to fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkah. V'hatorah, but the Torah says, Basukkah's teishvu shivas yomim, it says you sit in the Sukkah, Sukkah shall call davar, and it means to say Sukkah made out of any material. So there's no reason to be so strict. It actually ends up leading inadvertently to a leniency. The Gemara continues, V'chein be'ezra omer, similarly they say, we find in Sefer Ezra, it says, Su'u ahar v'haviu elai zayis v'alei Ali Zayis, V'alei Eitz Shemen, V'alei Hadas, V'alei Tamorim, V'alei Eitz Avos. Clearly, some of these things in the pasuk, Ali Zayis, Ali Eitz Shemen, those are not part of the Daled Minim. And what does it say in the pasuk? Laso Sukkos, Kakosov. They did this in order to build sukkahs. So you see, you're using items which are not part of the Daled Minim. That's what you see from Sefer Ezra in order to build sukkahs. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda will respond in terms of what's in Sefer Ezra. Hani lidefanos. That's talking about for the walls. Ale hadas, vale tamorim, vale tzavos l'schach, and the things that are part of the daled minim, like the hadas, like the tamorim, like the eitzavos, those things are going to be used for the schach. So indeed, you do have to use the daled minim for the schach. The Gemara continues now and finishes its proof. With Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Mesachin bin Asarim, that you're allowed to use boards of wood for schach. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now again, Rabbi Yehuda is saying you're only allowed to use the daled minim for schach, and he also says you can use nasarim, you can use boards of wood for schach. Alma siv ikara dedikla mina delulavahu. You see, what are you using? Obviously, you're taking the trunk of a palm tree in order to make these boards, and you see that's considered the min of the lulav. The point over here, this whole discussion was that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to bind the lulav in its own min, and the Gemara had said in the previous summit that the min includes the fibers from the trunk of the palm tree and also the trunk of the palm tree itself. All of that counts, and now the Gemara is proving that that is indeed true, because you see that the same Rabbi Yehuda who holds you need to use daled minim for the schach says that you can use from the trunk of the tree. That proves that the ikara dedikla is the min lulav. It is considered the same species as the lulav. The Gemara says shma mina. You see from this indeed that it is true that, again, like we said on the previous summit, you can use the ikara dedikla and you can use the sieve in order to bind the lulav according to Rabbi Yehuda. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda arba'as minim in midi achrina lo. Does Rabbi Yehuda really say that when it comes to schach, you can only use the daled minim and nothing else? Vatanya, but we learned in a brisa, sicha b'nesarim shel erez sheyesh ben daled tvachim. Let's say you use boards of cedar wood as your schach, and they're 4 tvachim wide. Divrei hakol psula, everybody agrees it's puzzle. Ein b'em daled tvachim, if it's not 4 tvachim wide, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. It says over there in the brisa, Rabbi Meir says puzzle, Rabbi Yehuda says kosher. Umoder, Rabbi Meir who says puzzle, he admits that it's okay. Shem yesh bein neser leneser kemali neser sheminich psal beineinu ksheira. If you have the amount of space between each board as the size of a board, and you put psal, you put kosher schach in that area in between, it's going to be kosher. All of this was discussed previously in the Masechet, but the point is, it seems to be clear that Rabbi Yehuda says you can use cedar wood, which is not one of the daled minim, for schach. And so the Gemara says, no, my erez hadas. The word erez could actually refer to hadas. Rav bar Rav Huna, Damar Rav bar Rav Huna. It's like Rav bar Rav Huna said, because Rav bar Rav Huna said, Amri Bey Rav, that they said in the yeshiva of Rav, Asara mine arozim heim. There are actually 10 kinds of erez. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Yeshaya, Etein b'midbar erez shita v'hadas v'gomer. It says in the pasuk listing erez, it says hadas as well. So you see that it's a kind of erez. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Meir Omer Afilu v'Mashicha v'Chulu. Quoting the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir says you can even use string to bind the lulav. You can even use a cord to bind the lulav. In other words, you don't need to use the same min as the lulav. Tanya, we learned in a brayso. Amar Rabbi Meir said, Ma'isa b'Yakira Yerushalayim she'yu ogdenes lulaven begimonio shel zav. There was a story in Yerushalayim, the important people of Yerushalayim, they used to use rings of gold in order to bind their lulav. So that should be a proof. You don't need to use the same min. So Amrulo, they said to him, Misham Rai, you think that's a proof? B'mino hayu ogdeno somel mata. They actually used the same min to bind it on the bottom. As we said, that was just for decorative purposes. And the Gemara continues, Amrluhu Rabba lahanu megadli hoshana devei reish galusa. Rabba said to those who were binding the hoshana, the lulav of the house of the exilarch of the reish galusa. Again, that was the political figure who was in charge, the Jewish political figure in charge in Bavel. He said to them as follows, Ki Godliso Hoshana, when you do this binding of the Hoshana of the Lulav, the Vei Reish Galusa, of the house of the Reish Galusa, Shairi Bei Beis Yad, you have to leave a little space where the person can grab the Lulav, Ki Echi Delo Tahavi Chatzitza. That way the binding won't be a Chatzitza. In other words, you can't pick up the Lulav by the area where it's bound, because then the thing that you're binding with will be a Chatzitza separation in your taking of the Lulav. You have to take the Lulav directly with no separation. Rava Amar, Rava says, Rava disagrees, and he says, Kol na'uso eino chotzitz. If you do something to beautify the lulav, that's not considered a chatzitz, it's not a problem at all. V'yamar Rav, and Rava says, Lo linkod inish hoshana besudra. A person shouldn't take the lulav with a handkerchief, with a cloth. Again, the same idea, you need a full taking, and this is not a taking, this is considered to be a separation. V'Rava Amar, and Rava says again, Rava argues, L'kich al yedei davar acher shmo l'kicha. If you take it through something else, that's still called l'kicha, that's still called taking. Amar Rava says, where can I prove to you that if you take it with another item like a cloth, that's still considered taking? That's not, as we learned in the Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that's talking about the mechatos. They used to take a hyssop in Azov and they would dip it in the mechatos, which was the waters that was made together with the ashes of the paraduma, and they used that to sprinkle on a person who was tamei meis in order to purify. So it says in the Mishnah, Azov kotzer. Let's say you have a hyssop that's too short; it doesn't reach the waters. Misapko bechut uvekush, so you can attach to it a thread, or you can attach a spindle. V'tovel umala, then you can reach in there, it's long enough now, and you can dip it. V'yochez be'ezov u'maza, then you can grab the hyssop and you can do the sprinkling. So the Gemara says, Amai, why should that be okay with a string or a spindle? V'lokach v'tovel amar achmana. It says you have to take the hyssop and you dip it. Sounds like you can't take it through something else, unless, elalav, don't you see, rather, don't you see, shma mino l'kicha, yidei davar acher shma l'kicha, that if you take something through something else, that's still called l'kicha, and that's the proof. So the Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know that's a proof? Dil mashani hasam, kevan dechibre kagufe dami. Maybe it's different over there, because you're attaching the thread to the azov, so that's already considered part of the azov. But over here, you're talking about taking the lulav with a cloth, there's no attachment, maybe that would be a problem. So the Gemara tries another proof. Ela mehacha, rather the proof from the following. Nafal mishvoferes l'shokas pasol. This is also talking about the mechata. So it's saying, let's say the ashes fall from a tube into the water, that's going to be pasol. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis.